All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fourth snack and chat. Today, I am not going to be hosting. Our wonderful new employer relations will be doing that. So, without further ado, here's John Scheibel, our wonderful new employee, to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah. And thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this for the first time. So hopefully this goes off without a hitch. Um, we have an awesome guest, Dan Ercolano from Wegmans, and he's going to talk a little bit about his role with Wegmans and what he's doing now, but as well as get into some first impressions, tips, and interview tips as well. So Dan, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, great. Glad to be here. Hello, everybody.
Awesome. So Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where did you go to college?
All right. Where I did my undergraduate study was at the University of Dayton, in Dayton, Ohio. And I did get received my master's locally here at RIT in Career and Human Resource Development.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, Wegmans is a tough market to achieve a job at. How did you wind up getting employed at Wegmans?
Great. I have an interesting story, and I know I need to kind of keep it brief, so I'm going to try to condense it. But the first thing I can say is how I was able to obtain employment at Wegmans a few years back was through networking. So I want to make sure I stress the importance of networking. I had a friend that worked there, so she was able to submit my initial resume. And then when I was called in finally for an interview, while in the lobby of Wegmans waiting for my interview, I ran into a high school friend that already worked for the company. So that kind of started building the network. I had a network to get my resume in front of somebody. And then after my interview, I had a high school friend that was able to talk to the person who interviewed me and put in a good word. And that kind of started the ball in motion.
Awesome.
And after a year later, it was about a year of interviews, several interviews over the course of a year, an offer finally came.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, that's something we'll get to a little later. That's a lengthy interview process. So very cool. Prior to starting with Wegmans, what's something you wish someone would have told you before you started your career with the company?
Well, I'm going to refer that to the career that wish someone would have told me was more of in the HR realm. Getting into the HR field, I got into it with back when I was a college student, thinking this is the kind of field I want to get into because I thought the idea of helping people find jobs and get jobs and provide job opportunities was going to be a great position to be in. And but the one thing I go is in the HR field, and we'll find as we go through the course of this interview is there's also the positive parts of HR, but then it's also you're dealing with a lot of the people that have not so negative things that happened in life. And so that's the emotional part, you take the work home sometime, and that's something I would have been nice to know going in, but that's.
Awesome. Yeah, it is a trying position, especially when those negative situations come up. So that's awesome. Tell us a little bit about Wegmans. What is it like to work there and work for the company?
Well, as hopefully people locally know, that it does get the accolades of one of the best places to work in America. Year after year, they've been on the best places to work list since the inception. And and what I want to say from my own personal standpoint is it really truly is a great place to work. And how I kind of cut that down to why I feel that way is really because as an employee of Wegmans, you are truly cared about by the company, by your direct supervisors and your coworkers. And that's really what I think makes and why it makes Wegmans such a great place to work is really the people and the caring that they do provide for their employees.
Very cool. So Wegmans has an interesting program as folks stay with the company for an extended period of time. They have a loaned executive program. So what's your current role right now with Wegmans?
My current role is I'm on the loan executive program doing a grant through Hillside Work Scholarship Connection and I get to work on a college campus. It's basically the MCC campus, where I'm helping Hillside students obtain this grant money to be able to afford to go to college, to MCC. And that is an opportunity is provided through Wegmans, that's kind of giving back to the community that way. And it's an awesome role.
Very cool. And prior to this current role, what were you doing with the Wegmans company?
Prior to the role, I was what they call, the title was employee advocate, which really what that translates to is an HR generalist. It's an HR generalist position. Each Wegmans store has an HR person in that store. And one of the things I try to explain to employees, like what is my role, is we hire employees. The employees are hired to take care of the customers, and how I explain the role of the HR rep or the HR advocate, they're called now, human resource advocate, is we're there to take care of the employee. And again, that goes back to that caring nature of that the company has to take care of its employees.
Very cool. Very interesting job. You get to meet a lot of different people. So it's right up your alley. You're very personable. So that's awesome. What's your favorite part about what you're doing right now?
What I'm doing right now is I'm kind of still in my role that I just mentioned about Safe for Success, but I'm also doing a role for Wegmans. And again, it goes back to that whole caring theme. It's one of the main values of the company. And during this pandemic crisis we're all in the midst of, and it stays with the value of the company of caring for its folks, is Wegmans employees are considered frontline employees during this pandemic. You know, grocery stores obviously stayed open through the whole pandemic, and they are offering their employees an opportunity to take the leave if they choose not to be on the front line during this crisis. So my role right now is to reach out to those employees who have decided to take this leave of absence, just so they know that their Wegmans is still there, they're connected to Wegmans, they're important to the Wegmans family, and that we're there for them when they're ready to return, when hopefully this crisis passes. So that's kind of one of my hats that I'm wearing, in addition to the other hat I just explained to you, working with MCC and Hillside students.
Awesome. And what would surprise somebody about your daily work, whether it's with Hillside Work Scholarship or your current role going through COVID-19?
I guess the surprise is just that every day you're never sure what you're going to encounter, and you have to be ready for that. And that's I guess the best advice I can give is just that that's what also makes it an interesting and engaging position, is because you just never really know what you're going to be encountering on any given day, because that's the nature of people and human resources. You just don't know.
Very cool. This that topic will come up a little bit later, as far as some critical thinking and the interview process and dealing with on a day-to-day basis as far as people go. So we'll cover that a little later too. What's the most important thing you've learned while working with Wegmans and Hillside Work Scholarship?
One of the most important things that I've learned in both these more current roles that we've been discussing is the importance of showing appreciation. And when I say that, showing appreciation for your supervisors, showing appreciation to your coworkers, showing appreciation to the people around you. And then the other most important thing is networking piece, that especially in a company like Wegmans and Hillside, the importance of building those relationships and the importance of that networking. Because at Wegmans, you never know. It's a very large company now, locally and regionally. And so you never know when you're going to be interacting with someone that you may have worked with in the past. And having those strong networks that you build along the way is paramount to being successful. And same with Hillside. Because in order to get my job done, you need to work through the other folks that you're working around.
Very cool. Yeah, I can remember many stories of youth working in Wegmans, receiving customers and not knowing Danny Wegman is walking through their line and not having a clue who that person is, but having to treat them with respect and, you just never know who you're going to meet.
That's right. Exactly.
Very, very good. Very good. How would you describe the perfect candidate for Wegmans? If you were hiring for Wegmans, either in a store or a part of corporate, what's the perfect person you look to hire for Wegmans?
The perfect person you look for in a candidate at Wegmans, and try to get this message out, is that passion to be able to serve the customer. And again, you're probably going to hear me say this a couple of times throughout the rest of this interview, because that is what is so important and paramount to Wegmans, is that customer service. So when you're a candidate and you're interviewing, anything you can do that express that you really have this desire to take care and handle and please the customer. And the other piece of that is also the desire to be in the retail industry. And that is going to come out in this course of our chat too, is that you have to really understand that it is retail and it's not a 9-to-5 job. And so I'll elaborate more on that with some of the other questions as we discuss that. But those two things are most important that you're looking for when you're talking with prospective employees of Wegmans.
Awesome. What positions typically, most people think when they walk into Wegmans, they see the storefront, they see cashiers, maybe some produce, people stocking shelves, doing the sub shop and things like that. But Wegmans as a corporation hires a lot of different employees. What kind of positions are typically hired within the Wegmans Corporation?
Okay, the typical positions are the positions you would the public would see, what it takes to run a store, the cashiers, the stockers, the clerks in the different departments. Those are the most typical positions that the company does hire for. But realizing that it is a company now of about 50,000 plus, that, as you said, there are lots of other functions that go beyond just the retail portion or the grocery store portion of the business, things like IT and accounting and finances and I can go on and so, but there are a lot of those functions. But the best way is to get into Wegmans, and the start is through the part-time ranks and through the stores, because the stores are really the majority of where the employee base is.
Very cool. And with college students and the opportunity to be able to work around, Wegmans does a great job of working around schedules. So as a student, being able to work part-time at Wegmans to get that start and your foot in the door, was an awesome suggestion that you just made.
Great.
Well, you already answered that, role. Best way to get hired full-time, try to get in there part-time if you can. If you had to give somebody advice who was looking to get hired by Wegmans, what's a piece of advice you'd give somebody?
This is a good piece of advice. I want to make sure we get this message out, is know the company, do the research, understand that it is retail. That's first and foremost. When you're interviewing a candidate and they say, oh, I need to work on a Saturday and maybe even a Saturday evening or a Sunday, and they're surprised about that. So know that you are applying for a retail position, and that you know the company. Those are the two things that I want to try to make sure I stress, that it's not a 9-to-5 type of role. And for college students, that's probably best, because then you need, you have flexibility. You have more of your availability is going to be evenings, weekends, but know that and express that when you're going through the interview process with Wegmans.
Awesome. Very good. So that wraps up basically the Wegmans portion and just getting to know you a little bit. Before we get into first impressions, we wanted to open up for any kind of student questions or about Wegmans or about Dan before we get into our topic. So Sarah, if there's anybody that wants to ask a question, right now might be a good time before we get into our main topic.
We currently don't have any questions in our chat box, and it doesn't look like anybody's jumping in right now to ask a question. So if anyone comes up with anything, just send them in the chat, and we can ask them at the end there. Oh, we got one from Rachel. Is it easier to get hired right now due to the virus?
That is a great question, and I'm going to answer that with a resounding yes, because there are quite a few employees that have chosen to take the leave. So if there is someone that's willing to be a frontline employee during this time frame, by all means, they are continuing to hire, and there are more openings now than there was prior to the pandemic. So the answer to the question is yes.
Great, thank you, Dan. So it looks like that is currently the only question. So students, you have any other questions? Oh, got another one from Rachel. Is it better to apply in person or online?
Nope. And the answer to that is online. It's all done online today, like most companies. If you're interested in a very specific store, I'll just take, for example, the Brockport store. If you chose to follow up, if that's the store you want to work in, obviously you still need to apply online. You need to have that application in. They won't even really consider you if you don't have your application submitted online. And then if you wanted to do a follow-up at the store, it's never a bad idea to do that, but online first.
Awesome. All right, we'll try this again. Oh, no. Okay, we got one from Alex. This one says, when is the best time to apply to begin working for the fall semester? So if they wanted to start working in, say, August.
That's a good balanced question. I would say we're probably approaching May, June, July, sometime in the summer months, that if you wanted to be ready to go and work around August timeframe for the fall semester. So I would say June to June. Let me give you that answer. Apply around June.
All right. And if they wanted to start working immediately, say this summer, when should they apply? Should they apply right now or?
That's correct. Apply now, but I want to also clarify that Wegmans is not a seasonal hire type of employer, that they won't just hire for the summer months. That's just never been their way of going about doing business. They are looking for more of that long-term relationship with employees. So I want to just make sure if it's someone that's just interested in a summer position, Wegmans probably isn't the place to be, because they won't just hire someone for 2 to 3 months. That answers that.
Definitely good to know. Thank you, Dan. All right. If anyone has any other questions, just send them in the chat and we can come back around to them at the end after this next section.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. So we're going to move into Dan. We're going to move into some first impressions. So it ties very closely to interviews, but there is that initial first stage as far as first impressions go. As a potential candidate as a company, why is it important to make a good first impression?
I don't want to give that standard answer that first impressions are everything, because they're important, though. I want to stress that first impressions are very, very important. So you want to make sure that from the minute you decide, hey, I'm going to apply for a position at this company, whether you're making that impression. I know we've got a question coming up that's going to address that, but they are very important. I'm not going to say it's the most important thing or it's paramount, but it's very important to have a good first impression. And we're going to talk more about what you can do to make a good first impression.
Awesome. What are some things a student could do? We host job fairs and career fairs on campus. There's job fairs and career fairs out in the community. What's something a student or a candidate could do at a job fair on campus or off to set them apart from another potential candidate that might follow in behind or precede them?
Great. I'm going to answer this one with a little story. When I had an opportunity to work many job fairs for the company. And I was working a job fair at the Rochester Convention Center several years back. This is going back a few years, may even be before the big boom of the internet. That's how long I've been around in the HR field. And this potential candidate, and when you're at a job fair, let me make sure too, you're talking to lots of candidates. In a typical job fair, maybe that one would have been over maybe 100 candidates within a short period of time, several hours. And for this person to still make this impression that she did, and I'm still telling this story this long, this so far along, is that she came and she waited in her line. She got up to me, we shook hands, went through the normal, gestures of a job, at a job fair. but she was so impressive because of the information and the knowledge that she had of the company. She actually had a resource notebook filled with articles and information about the company. And at this point, I was already with the company maybe about 10 years. And I thought I knew, quite a bit about the company, but she was teaching me. She was teaching me, and I was learning about the company I was there representing. And I was so impressed with that. And so I guess I just want to leave what I want to leave with you is that do the research, know the company. Not maybe you have to be to that extreme, that extent, but that's a very important piece today. In today's world, that you just Google Wegmans.com and you'll be able to find anything you want to know about the company. So know the company. That's how I'm gonna. That would give you an edge at a job fair.
Very cool. And typically, career fairs, job fairs will have company listings of who's going to be there. So it's very easy to do that and have that information ahead of time. So that's an awesome story. When you're meeting somebody for the first time, in particular, at a career fair or a job fair, what are you looking for when you meet that person for the first time?
First time, when obviously you have control over this, is appearance. I would be fully dressed like you were ready for an interview at a job fair. I personally look for then that personality, that outgoing disposition, that the ability is there already a little bit of, I see a customer service mentality to the person, and that's some of the things I'm kind of assessing at that point.
What are some red flags you notice when you meet somebody for the first time, where almost instantly that they may not be a Wegmans material, or whatever company you might be looking for?
Okay, some of the red flags would be, again, I've kind of alluded to this, and I'm going to keep stressing that point, is understanding that it's retail. That if someone's going to be approaching you, whether it is a job fair or it's just a face-to-face interview that you've had with a company, and when you talk about weekends and then being surprised that you need to have availability to be able to work the weekends, and the person kind of gives you that, oh, you're expecting me to work on a Saturday and Sunday, that's a red flag immediately for Wegmans. So, because obviously the busy time for Wegmans is evenings and weekends, and that's what they're looking for, the most bulk of being able to have employees be able to be available during those times. So that's, again, a red flag when someone doesn't understand that they're applying for a retail position, that it's not a 9-to-5 job.
So along those lines, Dan, I know from our time together that does Wegmans take a day off?
Oh, there are yes.
Wegmans as a whole, Dan.
The company, it does, and obviously with this coronavirus, the stores that are closing, and that's unprecedented. Ever since I've been with the company, it's always been a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week operation. But even though the stores are closed, there are employees still working in those stores during this time frame. But they're doing the cleaning and the sanitizing and the restocking, and making that store pristine for the next day's business. But yes, but do people get their time off? They do get their time off, but the company doesn't. The company keeps going.
I think one of the things that shocked me in moving to the region is the 364-day. Is it Christmas the only day that the company takes off? Is that right?
That is correct. That is the only day off. It'll close at 6 o'clock on Christmas Eve, and then they'll reopen the day after Christmas, 7 a.m. And all other days are open. New Year's, Easter, the rest of the major holidays that the Wegmans stores are open.
Very cool. So is an in-person contact at a job fair or something like that, or just a random meet and greet, is that the only way to make a first impression?
Absolutely not, especially today. You can make a first impression from your written communication, your electronic communication, whether it's an email and your texting. And then the other way that you make good first impressions is your phone conversations, because we're going to talk about the steps and the stages of the recruitment process for Wegmans. And it does start with a phone screen and an interview, so making that first impression. And the also advice I'd like to give at this point too is be mindful, if you are applying for positions, to make sure your outgoing voicemail is appropriate at this time. And so that all matters. And also your social media. I'm not one to be the one talking about social media because I'm not big on now. It's not not my thing, but I will know that if you do have social media, companies and recruiters will look at that. So make sure that that's appropriate during these timeframes, because those are all impressions you can make without ever having met any face-to-face with an employer.
Awesome. That's great advice, especially this on the social media end, because a lot of times people will click send and it goes out into the sphere and you forget about it, and then it comes back to bite you, during that interview time. So that's awesome advice. Sarah, we'll open it up for first impressions. I know some other questions came over about hiring, so if you want to open it up and talk about first impressions, then we'll get into interviews.
All right. Anyone got a question they'd like to ask?
Did somebody have a question before about hiring?
I think it was just the questions about, when to apply, if they wanted to work during the fall semester or just to start working this summer. I think that's all the questions we currently have. I'll keep my eye on the chat, and if anything else comes in, unless John, have you gotten any messages sent your way?
Nope, I don't have anything. I thought I saw something come across, but I think we're okay.
Alrighty, so I will let you continue then, and we'll jump back in with questions at the end.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so Dan, we covered the first impressions, which is huge, even before the interview process. Now we're on to interviews. So from an HR standpoint, what's the purpose of an interview?
Bottom line, purpose of that interview is to find the right fit. When you're interacting in an interview with a potential candidate, you're assessing, is this candidate the right fit, not only for the company, but the actual position that that candidate may be applying for or trying to, seek employment for. So it's the fit is the answer to that question.
What's a typical pattern for hiring? You had mentioned with the Wegmans, it was a year-long process. What's a typical pattern? And there might be some variance, but during interview process, obviously it varies by company, but what's a typical process starting with, right after an application is put in? What's the next steps?
Okay, great. And I don't want to scare anyone to think it's going to take that long to get hired at Wegmans, because that my situation was a little different and unique. But that's what it was. That's what it took. But now the typical process is you're going to submit an online application, right? You're going to put your application in and be very, very mindful of the availability. I think I've stressed that, but the more availability you have, meaning evenings, weekends, the more desirable your application is going to be to a potential recruiter that's on the other end looking at the applications. Then at that point, if what you've submitted in your application is interested and desirable to the company, then the next step is a recruiter is going to reach out by phone, most likely. It could be electronically through an email, but most likely the next step is going to be a phone interview, and we call that a phone screen. So that really technically is your first interview. You want to make sure to tell people to take that phone interview, treat it as an interview. Because that is going to be how you present yourself during that phone screen will determine whether you get invited in for a personal one-on-one interview, let's say at a Wegmans location. And then after the phone screen, then the next step is a one-on-one interview at the store. And if that interview goes well, and again, we talk about impression and talk about making sure you presenting yourself and communicating clearly and being able to show and express the ability to deal with the customers at that one-on-one interview. If all goes well, then the next step would be an offer. An offer comes. After the offer, depending on the position, if it was full-time or part-time, I don't want to get into all the great details, but then there's things called drug screens and background checks. And depending on which positions you're applying for part-time, some of those you do go through that, the drug screen and background checks before hire. And then getting past that step, then a start date and an orientation date and welcoming to the company.
Very cool. Interviews vary by company. I've heard of folks having to do presentations to folks. If you're in a teaching profession, you may have to provide a lesson that shows you're adept at working a classroom and things like that. So it really varies, and we'll talk about it a little later, but the interview process, it's a mystery. You don't know what's going to be thrown at you. Hopefully you get some idea ahead of time what you're going to be presenting at a lesson, but generally speaking, you're not sure what you're going to be facing when you go into that hot seat.
Yep. And I can express too, if someone was applying for, to piggyback off what you just mentioned, if someone was applying for a chef or a food service or food prep type position, there would be, just kind of similar to what you said, a cooking test, or you'd have to actually perform a cooking test in the kitchen as part of your interview process. But very typical part-time cashier, stocker positions, they're really, it's just the interview process that I described.
Very cool. Thinking, since most interviews vary, is it always a one-on-one interview? Speaking of other companies and things like that, is it always 1v1 during this process?
At Wegmans, it may be one or two people that may be interviewing you, and that could be sometimes just a training situation. Someone might be training to become an interviewer or a recruiter. So I don't want to always present that it's just going to be a one-on-one, but again, many companies do a variety of different things. I can share a story where I've had several different types of group interviews where I was the candidate and there were several people interviewing me, a panel, we call those a panel interview. I remember also applying for an HR position with a company where I was put in a conference room with a group of the employees, the potential customer that you'd be serving, and they could ask any question they wanted of you. It was just you and 10 or 12 employees from the company firing off questions. So no, it's not always just a one-on-one, depending on the company's process.
Oh, awesome. That's talk about a firing squad. Holy moly. So a little bit different from the first impression. You've had the chance to meet somebody. What's during the interview process, what's something you're looking for most in a candidate during that process?
Again, I've kind of talked about first impressions, making that good first impression, but the flexibility also, Wegmans' constantly changing environment is someone being able to be flexible. Are you going to be able to be adaptable? You may be hired in for one position, but then is there room to expand, and maybe you'll be asked to go help in other areas of the store depending on the nature of the business. So those are the things I kind of look for, is the adaptability, the flexibility, the kind of willing to do whatever you need to do to get the job done type of attitude. That's something you kind of try to assess as well.
Excellent, excellent. So in your opinion, Dan, what are 3 do's for an interview? There's a lot more, but just to pick your top 3, what are 3 do's when you sit down, or when a candidate sits down, 3 things the candidate should do to really make an impression during that interview process?
Okay, great. Even if it's a Wegmans interview and you're going in for a part-time position, dress the part. When I say dress the part, do dress appropriately. I would dress up for the interview. It doesn't have to be a suit, but you definitely want to make a statement with your interview. You don't want to go in shorts and sandals. I've had that happen, and that does not set well as far as an impression goes. So when you're interviewing, dress appropriately for a job interview, even if it's a part-time position. 2, know the company. I think I've stressed that. Know that it's retail. Know the types of hours that they're looking for, the type of work that you're going to be doing. Do the research prior to getting into that interview. And then 3 is making sure that you are also communicating to the employer, whether it's Wegmans or any employer you're interviewing for, is what are you going to do? How is that employer going to benefit if they hire you? What are you going to add? How are you going to contribute to that company or that team that you're interviewing for? And you want to do that in your communication process through the course of the interview. So those are the do's.
Very good, very good. And of course, we got to go to the opposite end of the spectrum. What are 3 don'ts? Aside from not wearing shorts and sandals, what are some other don'ts that you don't want to see during an interview?
The don'ts are, first and foremost, I might sound simple, but don't be late. I can't stress that enough. You never want to be late for an interview. and do whatever you have to do to prepare that you don't be late. 2 is do not let your cell phone become a distraction in an interview. If everyone has phones these days, make sure that phone not only is in vibrate, but it's off, at least for the course of the interview, that phone will not be a distraction. And then 3, don't wing it. So let me elaborate on what I mean when I say don't wing it. Even if it's a part-time job, you have to do some preparation and research for going into that interview. And again, I've stressed it enough that know the company, know the type of work, and know the type of hours that they're looking for to have, that candidate work. So those are my 3 don'ts.
Very cool. I know, from our time together, there were plenty of times where I've spoken with recruiters where they've tried to hire youth and someone, and they had never been in a Wegmans before, applying for a job at Wegmans, but had never set foot in a Wegmans store before. So at least shop at Wegmans, or if you're applying for a company, do that research, know what the market is, for that particular company.
Great.
Tying into that, 3 do's and don'ts, what's one or 2 things that a candidate could do during the interview while sitting there across from someone or across from a panel that'll really stand out as compared to other candidates?
Okay. The things that I would say that stand out is, again, everything we've already kind of mentioned: your appearance, your dress, but here's another one: is manners. Knowing that you have good manners, they do matter. Again, you've heard this, eye contact. I'm sure that is important. It's still very important in our culture, because it's going to be: are you going to be able to look customers in the eyes? Are you going to be able to someone that the customer is going to view as a trustworthy person? So that is important. I've already said do the research, but and know the company. So I hate to sound like a broken record, but those things do matter, and they do make a good impression in an interview when you understand the organization you're interviewing for.
Very cool. The next question I had was, you've answered multiple times, definitely do the research. That was going to be my next question, but you hit that multiple times.
Yeah,
so definitely hit that.
Beat that one to a pulp. So.
Absolutely. So one of my favorite questions, and one of the things we talk about when we're talking about interviews, is are there any gotcha questions that you've experienced as a candidate or have seen or heard, where there's a question that you totally weren't expecting? So if you don't mind talking about that.
Sure. And I have had this happen at an on-campus job interview for a company back when I was in college. Going through the interview process, and the recruiter asked me the question: if you were going to write a book about yourself, what I want you to do is tell me what the first 5 chapters of this book would be. What are the names of those chapters and why? And I was like, oh boy. And he had to answer that question right then and there. It wasn't your typical tell me about yourself, why do you want to work for our company? It was like, wow. So
what's the purpose of a question like that? Sounds silly, but what's the purpose for an employer asking a question like that?
The purpose for a question like that is trying to kind of get a gauge and measure of your ability to think on your feet, critical thinking. Do you have some critical thinking skills? And being able to process and sort, and then communicate. I think it was those are the other things that were testing for your ability to communicate verbally. A question, because that was definitely your open-ended question. That was something you're going to answer with just a good phrase or 2.
Very deep. One of my questions that I always enjoyed hearing or talking about is if you could pick one piece of equipment or piece of tool that's sitting on my desk right now, what would that be? And really getting you to think outside the box of, geez, what would I be? A stapler, a pen, a paper? What would I be if I was on somebody's desk? So it's a pretty cool question, and I appreciate it. We have one more question before we open up to questions from the students, and we've sort of talked about a bunch of these things, but what's the best advice you could give someone, whether it's applying for a job at Wegmans or a teaching position or a president of the United States? What's the best advice you could give someone before heading into that interview or trying to earn that position?
Okay. two things that kind of come to mind as far as best advice I can give is just like preparing for a very important exam or test is you want to be prepared. You want to do your homework. And when I say do your homework, I think we've talked about it through the course of this chat, is doing that research, knowing the company, that's being prepared. Prepare yourself with standard interview questions and role play with someone that you could, that's a trusted person that kind of get you into a mind frame of what, an interview format is all about, so that you're to take anything you can do to help nervousness. That's the best thing, best advice I can give. And then the other advice I'd like to give as far as interviewing advice is practice that close, having a strong close. When I mean there is being able to express it through the course of the interview, but then at the end of the interview, your strong desire and interest to obtain that position and work for that organization, and be able to communicate that verbally. I think is another important thing, because so many people will go sail through an interview and they'll do great, but then they don't have a close. So work on interviewing, closing strong is another piece of advice I'd like to stress.
Awesome. Well, Dan, we appreciate you so much taking the time during your schedule and making phone calls to Wegmans employees and whatnot. We'd like to open up the floor to any student questions that may have come up about first impressions or interviewing, or even about Wegmans in general. So if there's any questions, now's the time before we let Sarah wrap it up.
Just looking to see if anyone wants to chime in.
Don't be shy.
I do have a question here from Lieutenant Dan Fletcher. He works on the Brockport campus. He works in the, let me say it right, he's in the Enrollment and Scholarship Office for Military Science. He wants to know if a Army Reserves or National Guard cadet would come in maybe for an interview and they were to say that they may need to leave for an extended period of time, would that be a deterrent in an interview with Wegmans?
Absolutely not. We're not at all. It's a deterrent. Not only that, it's also the law that if military personnel have called up if they're a reservist and they're called up, that not only is you're obligated by the law, but Wegmans completely embraces, that veteran status and understands and knows, that that's their call. That's their duty at that point. So no, not at all.
Great, thank you.
Awesome question.
All right, it looks like we've got some crickets going here. Doesn't look like we have any other questions right now. Dan, if it's okay with you, I will send your email and your email address and a follow-up email to all the students, so that way if they have any questions, they can reach out to you later on.
That would be great. And what I would ask, though, and I know you, Sarah, is send it to Hillside at this point, my Hillside email, because that's the one I'm still kind of checking on a very regular basis. So
no problem.
Okay, that would be great. And I appreciate this opportunity. I hope shared a little bit of insights with your students about, preparing for an interview.
Definitely, you got a lot of great information for us. So thank you so much, John. Thank you for hosting the interview today. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, I think, I started with this position right before the pandemic, and I'm really looking forward to getting on campus and meeting the students and putting into practice all the things that Dan talked about. Practice, 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 to be able to help, students achieve, whether it's a part-time job on campus or a long-term career goal, is putting all these things into practice and making dreams and goals come true.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. I hope that you all have a wonderful weekend and a good rest of your day.